I was born in 1919 and add 11 to that, so that's 30. It's actually 30, isn't it? 19 and 11. It's 30. Rick just came in. Is that what?
He was the age of 11.
Yeah. So it was 1930, and then I went to California in 35.
Cleo, we're going to start kind of way back at the beginning.
Of what?
The beginning of time, of your time.
Beginning of the Dark Ages.
Exactly. Just for the record, your relationship with Lucille, you were her cousin.
Right. We, of course, our mothers were sisters.
Right.
And our grandparents' home seemed to be the center of the whole thing. Anytime anything happened to one daughter or the other, she went home. But we children were always there. I was born in that house.
And your mother's name was?
Lola. And Desiree was Lucy and Fred's mother.
Mm-hmm.
They were sisters. And they really changed up. Dee Dee had a period of time when she was not well.
Mm-hmm.
And was sent actually out to Arizona. But my mother was there, so life goes on for the children. We go to the Celeron school. I went to kindergarten there. Lucy was, she's 8 years older, so she was at almost in high school when I started school. And of course Dee Dee, when she was. In fact, Desiree got the name of Dee Dee all her life because when I was little, I couldn't say Desiree, and I called her Dee Dee. And you know that when Dee Dee, I'm sure a lot of this is history, was out west with Henry Ball, he was a lineman.
This is Had, right? They refer to him as Had Ball?
Did they?
Yeah, this was in the book I saw
I
recently.
don't know. But I always knew Henry Ball was their father.
Right.
And so she came, after Henry died out there, I can only imagine that she called home and said, what am I, and Grandpa must have, that he was the father figure in our lives,
Right.
said, you just come home and we'll handle everything. And they brought the body and everything back. And she was pregnant with Fred. And
So Lucille's father, Henry, died when she was how old?
she was 3. Because we're all 4 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
By the time Fred was born, then Lucy was 4.
Mm-hmm.
So she was 3, 3.5, 3, something. And so come home. And home she came. And brought Lucy back and gave birth to, Lucille.
Now tell me about your mom and dad.
Well, my mother met my father in Celeron, actually down in the park. And I don't know whether my mother was working at one of the amusement things or working in a shop or whatever she was working in. But they met.
That was Mr. Mandikos, right?
Right, George Mandikos.
Mandikos.
And he was really a young Greek immigrant come to this country. He had brothers in New York, 2 older brothers, and so his family let him go to them. And how my father was a rural person, which I am too, and he was not happy in New York City. And he expressed the desire that he would love to find a small town in which he could maybe find work and live in. And they said, we have a friend, a Greek, who had a kind of a candy store or an ice cream parlor, as we used to know in the old days, down in Jamestown.
Okay.
And now I don't even know that man's name. It was Nick something. It was a very Greek name.
Mm-hmm.
And the brothers told him, Nick so-and-so is in Jamestown, New York. You might like that town.
Was it Shepis?
I can't remember. But he owned it. So my father came out really to see that man and to see Jamestown and Salron and all there was here. And then he met my mother very casually in the town, Salron, really. And then he loved everything about meeting the family, Grandpa, and particularly Grandma. Grandma was sort of everybody's favorite.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long before they were married. And again, you move into the house. You live there.
Now, the house was located where?
Well, now it's called Lucy Lane.
Right.
But what was it before? 8th Street?
8th Street,
Yeah, 8th Street.
So at the time, who was at the house then? Describe everybody that was there.
Everyone that was there, now this is from the time I have remembered. Grandpa Hunt, Fred C. Hunt, and Flora Bell, who's Grandma Hunt, Dee Dee, and she had remarried Ed Peterson. So she and Ed, and Lucy, and Fred, and myself.
How did you all fit in that house?
That's what Lucy said when she came back for her first trip.
Yeah.
Ed went through the house and she came back. She said, how did we all live there? But there were 3 bedrooms upstairs, and the rear bedroom was Lucille's and mine. The middle bedroom was Grandpa and Fred, and the front bedroom was Dee Dee and Ed's. Now, there's a lapse of time there when my mother and father had left the house after they were married, and he wanted to open a restaurant in a city in Michigan, and I can't remember what city. So for a brief time, they were gone. And they took me with them, but it didn't last long. Maybe a year. And the business, it didn't work out. So I was back, and my mother was back, and not my father. And they divorced. They were divorced by the time I was, age 4 or 5. So now we're back again. And I'm trying to think now, too. So when we came back, where did we sleep? And then Lucille would be gone. If she was 15, she went to New York this time. And then I remember sleeping with my mother in that back room. So everyone, between the comings and the goings, I guess there was always a bed or a place for us. And then my mother applied to nursing school at the Gowanda State Mental Hospital. And so then she, of course, was gone. 3 years it took to go through the nursing course. And I stayed at home when I was in school in Cell. So, that was, our roots were there.
Yeah.
Even though we took off in different directions and did different things. And then Grandma Hunt also, had cancer in the latter years. And again, I was very young. I was about 4 when Grandma had cancer, and I remember her being down in what we call the parlor, and it had been made into a bedroom for her, and she was nursed in that room, and then she died.
Was it traumatic?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Because she was just a sweet and wonderful woman. I was very concerned. I'd never seen anybody ill and bedridden. And I was always told, quiet, because Grandma was resting. A lot of times I'd peek in and Grandma could see me. She'd say, and then she'd hold my hand and we'd talk. And So yes, it was very traumatic. Then she passed away. My first face, as I say, was serious illness and death.
Right.
And then I'm trying to...
What did Fred do? Your grandfather, what did he do for a living?
Oh, Fred C. Hunt.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Because Fred Gall was named, after him.
Right.
In fact, you know probably that Fred was born July 17th on Grandpa's birthday.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
It was Grandpa's 50th birthday. And he had lost a son, 18 years old. Uncle Harold was up in the Hunt cemetery.
Oh, wow.
He had lost his son and had these two daughters. Harold was the oldest. And Harold, I don't know what he contracted, but something like in those days, influenza or something. And he was 18 years old and he died. And Fred Ball was born on Grandpa's 50th birthday, and that was...
Wow.
And then he called him Daddy, because his daddy was dead too.
Yes.
And so that became his dad, his father. And Fred C. Hunt had been... There's an old brick building that's all boarded up out by the railroad tracks, and that was a furniture factory.
Mm-hmm.
And before the lathe, before any of the machinery and things came in, he was a hand wood carver. Almost every piece of furniture we had was something that Grandpa had carved. And a little playhouse, a little dollhouse. Lucy, he started with Lucy, and then he carved every little piece of furniture in that dollhouse. And then put him the machine age. And this, talented man was now, you take a piece of wood and you turn out a leg, table legs. And it was really, he died a little to be working on it. You saw Charlie Chaplin, Modern Times?
Right.
That's kind of what it was all about then. His craft, his art, if for not. And so that's what he was. He was a hand wood carver and worked in a furniture factory.
Now, during that period of time, your Aunt Dee
Mm-hmm.
had married Ed Peterson.
Right.
And as I read, they met, I think, while they were working together at Weber Knapp Company, which was a company here in Jamestown. Describe a little bit about Ed Peterson. What are your recollections of him?
Ed Peterson really made no effect on any of us. In other words, he wasn't he didn't enter into fathering. He didn't try to be a father to Lucy or me or any of us. We didn't bother him. I mean, I don't ever remember him speaking, don't do that, or being harsh about anything, or correcting us. Nothing. You walk through like there was no connection. Mm-hmm. It was a very strange thing. He was just really a nice man that came and went, but there was no connection.
Did he supply monies to the family at all? Like when he worked was that part of the economics?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Dee worked. She worked at the Marcus Company in town, which I don't know how long ago. I mean, since that's been gone, I'm sure. It was a very high boutique shop. And Dee was in charge of millinery. And that was her department, millinery department. So she rode the little red car, the streetcar came in to Jamestown. She would catch the streetcar into Jamestown, and that was her job. And I don't really know where Ed worked, but he did. And of course, Grandpa worked down there at that factory. So the three of them are where the economics came in. And we three kids were. And then, of course, my mother died Dee Dee just got a call one day. My mother, during summer vacation, I would go and spend time with my mother at Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that I was back home. I had gone to spend time with her, and she was to graduate, and then she would come back home. So I went on home. And she had a nurse, you know. She was really a fully accredited nurse, and she had a pain that she was taking care of herself and did a report, and it was appendicitis. And when it bursts, then it becomes peritonitis.
Right.
And in those days, there was no penicillin.
Mm-hmm.
So once that burst, there's nothing they could do with it. And she died. And Dee Dee got a call. And that her sister had died. And come, take care of Dee Dee. Poor Dee Dee, everything fell on her.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Dee Dee telling me that Mama had died, and I remember I was very distraught, and I said I couldn't believe it. I had heard of children losing their parents, but it had never happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was very shaken up about it. So then she brought Lola home, my mother, and of course she was buried up here.
Mm-hmm.
And then that terrible accident.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that. In fact, for the benefit of Lucy, I guess with my legal part, I went and got some of the papers because she was very interested about the accident that occurred. Let me read something if I could.
Mm-hmm.
Warner Erickson, 8 years old, Sauron, is still in a serious condition at Jamestown General Hospital as a result of having been shot in the back Sunday at Sauron. Lucille and Fred Ball were shooting at a target in the rear of the home of the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Peterson. The Erickson lads stepped out in the range, and Johanna Ottinger, a young girl, fired about the same time, the bullet entering the boy's back and passing through his lung, lodging in his chest. It was reported Mr. Hunt, grandfather of the Ball children, was watching the target practice. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, both Fred and I have heard that Lucille was there, and she wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how that story, we don't know, and there's nothing we can do about it, and the stories persist. But Fred and I know that Lucille was not even there. Warner was my friend. He was my age.
Mm-hmm.
And Warner and I were playmates together. We were very close playmates. There weren't a lot of children we saw around that I can remember, but he lived right next door. But next door was, an acre away or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't. And Fred came home with this young lady his age. They were 12, 13. Does it say what her age was?
It doesn't know.
No. But I have to figure that if Warner and I were 8, Fred's 4 years older. And so he could have been he would be 12 or 13 years old. Fred would be.
Mm-hmm.
And Grandpa had originally, I also heard another story that Grandpa had bought him the rifle but Grandpa used to use the rifle to shoot skunks.
Oh, sorry.
And they used to raid the hen house. We had a pretty good sized hen house. And they would raid the hen house, suck the eggs and kill chickies and everything. So he had used it for that. But there were no houses or anything that I could see in the back of our property. And they had set up a target. And he and Grandpa used to target shoot with this .22 rifle. And so he came home with this young lady from school, and he said, "Grandpa, can we target shoot?" And Grandpa said, "Oh, I don't think so, Fred." So, Grandpa, you'll be with us, and, you load the gun, and and it does. And, of course, Grandpa would do anything for Fred anyhow. So he prevailed upon it. Grandpa said, "All right." but I'll handle the gun and I'll do the thing. Okay. So I said, I want to go out and see too. So we went into the yard, and Grandpa said, okay, you are there, that corner, and you stay there. Okay? All right. So the boundaries and rules were set. And that's what they did. He loaded the gun, and they each had a turn. Fred had a turn, the girl had a turn, and it was, and I don't remember how many rounds they shot. In the meantime, Warner comes to the gate, which enters over here at this side of the yard. And he said, Grandpa said, what do you want, Warner? And he said, I gotta go to the store and I want to know if Cleo can go with me. So I said, all right, come on in. And he directed him over to me. He said, now you two stay right there. Okay. So Warner said, can you go to the store with me? I said, I don't want to go now. I'll go with you and everything, but I want to watch them, shoot. So he said, but I said, I'll go with you when they're through. Okay. So the two of us stand there and we watch them target shoot. And meantime, Warner's mother, who was very strict, she looks out her window and she can see us in the yard. And she yells, Warner! And he says, I gotta go. And the girl has the gun and she's sighting the target. And like kids, Warner, his mother, he's going to duck under the gun and it shoots. And get him right there. And he just fell, sprawled on the ground. And he yelled, I'm shot, I'm shot, I'm shot. Of course, Grandpa denial. No, you're not. No. Yeah. And then, of course, the blood began to appear on his shirt. And then everybody went crazy. Grandpa was the phone and he called whatever you called in those days. I don't know if you had a 911. I don't imagine so. But he called whatever you called and the ambulance came. Of course not. And Mrs. Erickson, of course. And I can understand. Oh, what would you do? And she began raving, and you killed my son, you killed my son. And I got frog in my throat.
You want to get some water?
I think she took the water. I'll take it. And I should do it. And really, while Grandpa was making calls and doing all, she was just running up and down the street. Just went ran. My son was killed. And it was just a terrible tragedy. But that's how it happened. And Fred and I were the only ones there that, we saw it the same. And we don't know how Lucy ever got into that. But
Let me read. This is from a contemporary article.
Yes? Oh, contemporary.
And it said, Lucille Ball, granddaughter of the defendant, stated her grandfather asked Cleo and Warner to go outside the fence around the Hunt home. She stated the target was about 3 feet high. She said she saw the boy get off the ground where he was lying and start in front of Joanne Ottinger. She said, I reached for him. I don't think anyone saw it but myself. She said the boy lay on the ground and was picked up and taken to the Erickson house. On cross-examination, she also made a grab for the boy and missed, and the gun went off and he was hit. Goes on to say, Cleo, is it Mandikos? Mm-hmm. Mandikos, a young miss of about 8 years, who resided with Mr. Hunt, was called into the stand and told to tell what happened. She was unable to speak for tears and slowly sobbed that the two children, she and the Erickson boy, were laying on the grass. She stated she was standing, but he was lying there. She said he jumped in front of the gun. She stated she told him not to go. On cross-examination, the little girl was more composed and stated the Erickson boy had come to get her to go to the store with him. He told her he was going to the store, but didn't ask her to go along with him. She stated the two children had frequently played together. Those happened to be. That was
the versions. Yes, Fred and I both had seen a newspaper clipping.
Yes.
Where Lucy was in. We said, We just looked at each other and said, there was no way she was there. But
what a traumatic experience.
oh, I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, it's like things that, well, I suppose all accidents are just things that are unbelievable. That's why they're called accidents. But and then when Warner was after he was released from the hospital, and of course in a wheelchair for life, Mrs. Erickson would wheel him up and down in front of our house, and up and down in front of our house. And yet I couldn't, she wouldn't let me talk to Warner, she wouldn't let me play with Warner, she wouldn't let me come near Warner. She just paraded him up and down. And Warner and I would just sort of look at each other, and we couldn't, couldn't be together. I mean, the accident was terrible, but the child needed me to be with him again and play with him a bit. But, and of course, that broke up the household because the Ericksons sued Grandpa or charged Grandpa or whatever the charges were for reckless something or other. And so we moved into Jamestown. Dee Dee rented a house in town, and we all moved in. And
where was that?
I don't know. Mexican, I don't know. I can see the house too, and the whole thing. I have no idea what street it was on. And in the meantime, we had to go through the trial and all, and I don't know how long that lasted. And then I guess it also told that what the punishment was. He was to be confined for 1 year within the city limits of Mayville. And so I remember riding up with Dee Dee. She took Fred and me, and she wanted to find a rooming house, and it ended up a couple, and I don't know if they had other boarders in the house or not. But Mr. and Mrs. somebody, I don't know who their name was or how Dee Dee found them, but she did. And yes, they were delighted to have Grandpa. And he stayed there for the year that he had to. And we would go up on weekends and visit with him and, try to do what we could. I was wondering how old he must have been. If Fred was, well, he was only in his 60s, I imagine.
Yeah.
Because if Fred was born on his 50th birthday, and this happened when Fred was 13, maybe. So he was 63, 64, something like that. And, but it really, you can imagine what he must have felt.
Okay.
And he just became an old man after that. I don't think he ever worked again.
Yeah.
And then the family really began to break up because, then my father showed up and wanted me.
Was that tough? Had you been in contact with your dad after your mother had died? Had you been in contact?
I remember him coming, and I don't know whether it was my mother had already died at that time. He would come every now and then, just out of the blue, no notice ahead or something. He'd just show up, and he would want to take me into Jamestown and take me to lunch and that sort of thing. That was a very awkward relationship on my part. I mean, I couldn't identify with him, and I had no feeling one way or the other for him. And so he had maybe 2, maybe 3 visits that I remember. And I remember once he came in, he must have had some extra money or something. He came in and gave me a birthday party at the dining room in the old hotel. It was either the old Samuel's Hotel or wasn't there a Jamestown?
Sure. Hotel Jamestown.
Hotel Jamestown. And I don't know what age I was then. And of course, then Dee Dee has to go through all this again, through another court battle, because I said I didn't want to go. And my mother, of course, hadn't left any guardianship papers or anything,
Right.
having no idea she would die at 32. So we went to court. And it didn't amount to much because the judge, particularly in those days, the natural parent, should have the right. And so that was it. I was to go with him until I was 16 years old, at which time I could then choose where I wished to live. And so I spent 5 years in Buffalo. And that was a really traumatic experience. When after I had, matured and gotten older, there are many things I look back and I think it was a very valuable experience because I lived in a totally Greek ghetto. Everybody was Greek. The women were often just, the men had worked in the States for years and things, and they go back to Greece and they marry a nice Greek girl, and they bring them back to the States. And they don't know, the women don't know English, and the women don't go out to work, so they don't learn the language. And they live in an area where there are other Greeks, where you go to the market and he's a Greek, and you go to the grocery store and he's a Greek, and so they don't have to learn, to speak English. Well, I had to learn to speak Greek, and I was in the 8th grade when I went there. I was put in the 8th grade. I remember that. And then I eventually went to Fosdick Maston High in Buffalo. And but during that time, I was certainly oriented and introduced to a whole foreign culture. And I lived in a Greek community. I went to Greek school after public school. The school was sponsored by the church. It was held at the church. I went to the Greek church. They baptized me in the Greek church. And I had godparents appointed. Well, it was, wow, just a whole nother life. And when I was, and there were bitter feelings, so that he wouldn't let me have any contact with my family. They couldn't call me or write to me or anything. And then that lesson, it was very bitter the first 3 years. And after it, I was able at least to have contact. And one day, I picked up the Buffalo News, and going through it, I saw a picture of maybe 6, maybe 8 young ladies sitting on a trunk with their legs crossed, and they were on their way to Hollywood. And I looked, and Lucille was one of them.
Oh my gosh.
And then I couldn't believe it, and I looked down the names. Sure enough, Lucille Ball. And these were the Goldwyn girls. They were Samuel S. Goldwyn. And they were to go to Hollywood to make Roman Scandals starring Eddie Cantor. And I couldn't believe it. Oh. And shortly after that, she contacted me and said that she was on her way to Hollywood, but she was going to come into Buffalo and see me before she went.
Wow.
And when she came in to see me, she said, "It's not long now." She hadn't even gotten there yet. And her plan already was, "You're going to come to Hollywood, finish school, on your 16th birthday, you're going to join us." And that's, of course, the way it turned out. And in the meantime, not only the family had broken up after I was taken away, but, Lucille was in New York and she worked there. And then Dee Dee went to New York also, and she worked at Stern Brothers, and Lucy modeled. And then there was a point they were in Washington, D.C., and I don't know why or how. Dee Dee and Fred were in Washington, D.C. So we were all scattered then, just all broken up. And when Lucy hit Hollywood, within a year's time, Fred had come out to Hollywood, and he had finished school. And Lucy was then under contract to RKO, $75 a week stock contract. But she was influential in getting Fred a job. One of the very in-movie restaurants was called the Bon Dome. And that was a great lunch place where anybody who would eat there. And she got him a job at the Bon Dome. And he was something they used to call page boy. He was a page boy. I mean, in those days, restaurants if they were expensive restaurants and everything, they had page boys. Because you realize now everybody's got cell phones and everything, but then a telephone call for someone important at his office was calling or something, and went to just one phone, and then the page boy would carry the message to the diner, and he would usually tip him, and then they would direct him to the phones, and he'd, So he was a page boy at the Bon Dome. And the owners of the Bon Dome also owned Trocadero, which was a very famous, on Sunset Strip, it was a very famous nightclub. And so that was Fred's job. And so the two of them, by a year or so, they felt that, they could support the family. And they rented a house at 1344 North Ogden Drive in Hollywood. And they painted, and papered, and bought furniture, God knows where, probably secondhand stores and everything, and furnished the whole thing. And Grandpa and Dee Dee came out. I went out in 1935, so I figure that the rest of them had been there maybe 3 or 4 years. Lucy I don't know when Roman Scandals, had to be like 30, 31, 32, something like that. And she had a tough time landing finally that stock contract at RKO. She had a lot of very lean times. Jobs were not that easy to find, especially in film, in the movies, studios.
So her going out there, really, that was the end of the era. And certainly part of that breakup because of the lawsuit. And as you now reflect back, and I suppose you went back the other day to the house, probably just a wave of memories came back to you.
Oh, absolutely. The house was just full when I walked in.
Yeah.
It was just full. And when I walked we didn't, in those days, we called the front room the parlor. And this was after Grandma was done. And there was the piano, because both Dee Dee and my mother played the piano. And I played a violin. I had taken some violin lessons at Square Street. I played the violin, Fred played the cello, and Lucy played the saxophone.
Was there?
And that was our trio that accompanied the piano. And that was our musicals. We used to have some particularly weekends or something like that. And then from the entry hall, the parlor was on the left. Straight ahead was what we call the sitting room. And I can remember all the furniture was all wicker. The wicker rocker and the wicker little settee and all that was it. And then off the sitting room was the dining room. And of course, I envisioned the dining room because it seemed to me like it was a great long table, and we always were always at least 8 people, it seemed, around the table. And I could remember the things that were on the wall. There was always that print with the ducks or the quail or something that they shot, and they were hanging by the claws, and the other side was the fish. And then on one wall, there was a framed poem, Rudyard Kipling's If you can, when all about you are losing, there's a thing. If you can, and I used to recite, it always ends up, then you'll be a man, my son, And that was my favorite poem. I loved that. If you can. And then into the kitchen. And that was the extent of the house. There was a little porch in back, of course, for the icebox and things like that. And then there's a cellar downstairs because that whole acre that's now just lawn, it was Grandpa's garden.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew everything, all vegetables, berries, different fruits, rhubarb, just everything from that garden. And Dee Dee, of course, canned it for the winter months because there certainly was no refrigeration. And it was a very, very idyllic time. It was happy memories, except for the two, just, the accident and being taken away. But up until that time.
What was your relationship in Sauron with Lucille? She's 4 years older.
8.
8 years older than me. Oh, that's right, 8. Yeah.
Fred's 4 years older, and she was
Correct.
8 years older. So I was the little sister that saw this teenager come and go, and she had boyfriends on motorcycles. I remember the motorcycle coming, and they'd give me a ride. Of course, I always say, "I want to ride. Okay, hop on." So it's like a kid sister that got the big sister that got all the boyfriends and all the things, but you get in on it.
Right.
It's fun, They take you places and they do things too. And Fred, even Fred, was 12, 13. He had girlfriends he'd take to the movie or something like that. And sometimes Dee Dee would say to Fred, and you can imagine how a 12, 13-year-old boy, Dee Dee would say, "You take Cleo along with you." He didn't want me along with him. But he was always very dutiful. "Mom, do I have to?" "Yes, you do, because there's no one home this afternoon, so I want you to." Okay. And then we all went to the Sauron school.
Mm-hmm.
So we did all the chores of the house. And when I say we, I didn't have to do much except dust or something. But it was up to Fred and Lucy to Fred go out. If it was summertime, he'd go out and get all the vegetables for dinner. He'd go out and pick a head of lettuce and some tomatoes and meat things and get those. And Lucy would have to wash them, have them clean, peel some potatoes, and then Dee Dee would bring home whatever meat they were going to have that evening for dinner or something. And those were the chores that were allotted to each of us. And winter time, of course, Grandpa built toboggans. He built a toboggan and sleds for us. The lake was then the big interest in the wintertime.
Sure. Did you ice skate?
I wasn't very good at anything. That Mediterranean blood in me didn't appreciate. What do you have?
We, Celeron Park.
Oh, Celeron Park in the summertime, of course, that was it every single night. Because there was always something going on at the bandstand. Music was playing. You could just sit there and listen to music, or when it got dark enough, of course, they'd show a film. And it was usually, Laurel and Hardy or some funny thing. And we'd watch a film. And I don't remember, that we had a lot of money to be spending on rides, but it was so much excitement, the lights and the things and the roller coaster going and the Ferris wheel, and you could just watch, and it was exciting. We didn't have to go on them.
Right.
And then the ballroom at the end of the pier. We couldn't go in, but we got glimpses. We got to look in and see what it was. And those were the days when they had those great big mirrored balls that the light would hit and the sparkle, and big bands, big name bands playing. So there was just always the excitement of the park and people and lots of them. And isn't it wonderful when you think that was 70 years ago, and the safety, we were kids just running around, loose in the park. Sometimes Fred wasn't with me. And from an early age, I could go anywhere in that park. I walked down there from our house on 8th Street and walked home. I'm sure I knew that I had to be home at a certain time. But the freedom, nothing bad ever happened, it seemed. We didn't know about anything bad happening to us. So it was a time of innocence, a lovely time. And that was our whole life during the summertime.
Did you feel like you were just like the rest of your children as far as having wealth or not wealth? Did you feel like you're struggling financially, or did you have it, or do you get any sense?
No, because Celeron, I didn't see anybody else that had anything.
Yeah.
You went to other children's houses and things, but what could they have?
Mm-hmm.
We did have telephone, and you had record players, but there certainly was no television, and there were no shops. I don't remember having clothes that were any better or worse than anyone else. No, none of that. In Celeron, maybe in Jamestown, in a larger, it was a larger town, and even some of these places around here might have existed that we didn't know about, but not in Celeron.
Johnny DeVito.
Mm-hmm.
What's that mean to you and to Lucille?
Oh, lots. It was, of course, I wasn't, it's so wonderful to be be young. I realized how very concerned Dee Dee was.
Why was that? Why was she concerned?
Oh, because Johnny DeVito was certainly this was Prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was known just by everybody that he was running those bootleg thing to Canada and that. And she knew that Lucy, or certainly feared that she did, that she would ride with him in the car and go, back, and what could happen if they were apprehended, or if, and so of course that was just terribly worrisome to her. But by the same token, Johnny took me to his house. And his mother was just one of those, and the father, the typical Italian thing, you're welcome in the house. And he had a kid sister, Florence. Irene, I understand, is still, maybe Florence is, I don't know. But Florence was my age. And he had told me, I have a sister, and I did. Florence and I hit it off. And I used to love to go to the DeVita home and play with Florence and things on weekends when school was out. And so, I was sort of like living in a woohoo, didn't realize what was going on around me.
Right.
It was with me. I liked Johnny, and he took me to the nice sister, and I played, and a good, warm family. And, but of course, Lucy, this was, the first passion and the first love of her life. She never doubted. I mean, she never denied that. And she always claimed that she fell in love with my father. And that she was always the Latin. It's interesting that Johnny DeVito was first, then came my father, who was dark and handsome and with an accent. And then from there to Desi Arnaz, who was dark and handsome with an accent. Yeah. So there was a pattern there. And she always said that she fell in love with my father because Uncle George was just handsome. And then Desi. So that, of course, was Dee Dee's concern, that Johnny DeVito was not an appropriate relationship right then and there with, she must have been 15 or so.
How old was he now? What was the age spread?
I think he was like 25, 27, something.
About 10 years maybe?
Probably.
Yeah.
About 10 years old.
That lasted a while, didn't it?
Yes. Well, Dee Dee was always very aware that if you had tried to do anything about that, and I don't mean that she didn't, she talked to Johnny, she talked to the family, she talked to Lucille, but you can't say you'll stay in this house and you'll never see, because fortunately that Lucille did have a focus, and she did know she wanted to be a performer, and she did know she wanted to go to Hollywood or New York, someplace exciting. So that, in a sense, was probably the saving grace, because though she was certainly enraptured in love with Johnny, but you offer her a chance to go to New York and go to drama school, which is what she wanted and everything, it won out. And she found out about a drama school in New York, an acting school, and where she got the information. I suppose you can get almost any information if you want to have a theater arts teacher, or you ask someone what's where. And it was a well-known school in New York. And she told Dee Dee, she just nagged her, "Oh, Mama, you gotta go. I gotta go." And Dee Dee knew that, this child was like, if you don't, she'll run away, or she'll get Johnny to drive her to New York or something. So she said, let's see what we can arrange. She was a very sensible woman. And she happened to have friends that live in New York, a couple. And she said, I do know. And someone that she had worked with had moved to New York, married. And she called her. And she said, I have a daughter who's hell-bent on going to a drama school in New York. And she's only 15. And, but if I let her go, I can't let her go until I find, could you possibly, do you have the accommodation? Could you, I'll pay room and board, and it's a matter of so many weeks. And they said, oh, we'd be delighted. And it would be very interesting. So that's how Lucy got to go for the first time
Mm-hmm.
to New York. And off she went to that. And then, of course, nothing was ever successful in New York. Jobs that after she came back and finished school, went back again.
Did she graduate from high school?
I heard she did not finish, that she did not finish. And it, and it didn't matter to her what she read. She was, so.
Did that bother your mother at all? Did they ever talk about the fact she never had
No,
a degree?
they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
But later in life, when Lucille gave when she already was a name, I don't know, she was just in movies, she wasn't I Love Lucy, but she would give interviews and things about encouraging other children to get their education and do anything, and like she always regretted that she didn't. But I think if she had life to live over, she'd have done the same thing, off to New York, but she didn't approve of that.
Right.
Because the older she got, just the opposite, the more what's the word? It's not provincial, but she got, what's the opposite of being, of not caring about laws and things, and not caring about how you appear to other people, or when you're young, you don't care. You're young and you're right. But the older she got, the really more strict she became about these things.
Including her own children?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
including her own children. And that was one of the reasons in the Here's Lucy show that she wanted her children on the show, because they were teenagers and she wanted to know where they were, and the work also required a lot of study the script for the next day. You learn your lines or anything. You don't have any time for extracurricular activity. And she kept them tight, really. And that's why another aspect of my becoming a producer was also that Auntie Cleo would be there also to help keep things, keep the kids, in hand and talk to them. Be like sending them to the principal.
Yep.
She'd have times when she'd say, "Go to Cleo's office." My office door would open. And, "What are you doing here?" "Mother said we should come and talk to you." And she said, "And I heard them sing and stuff in the plane, the singing. I mean, you would tell me, Auntie Cleo, would you?" I said, "Of course I would tell you." And I said, "When do you think all this could happen?" I said, "We can account for your mother's life almost year by year by year. We know one of us knew. I said, we know where she was. We knew when she was in New York. We know, of course, by then Johnny DeVito was all gone anyhow. By the time she was in New York and modeling and things like that, I mean, there was no more Johnny."
Did he surface occasionally just as a friend?
I don't know. Once in a while, I think he did while she was in New York. He would get in touch with her and things like that. But by this time, he wasn't riding high. I mean, he needed money at times. And I know that I almost think it was Irene DeVita who called and wanted to know if they could borrow some money, things like that.
Yeah.
And but that's all. Once Lucy, New York, and everything, she was really leading very sophisticated life. When you're 15 and in this hometown, and Johnny just was
Well, he was flag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you go to New York and you're modeling in a top house and you're getting to be very sophisticated with the clientele that you handle and all that, then the guy back home, doesn't look all that exciting anymore.
When you were out in California, did Dee Dee keep in touch at all with Ed? Peterson?
Ed Peterson died, and I don't know the time span, because there was a time when we said to Dee Dee, and particularly Lucille, said, you know, you really ought to get a divorce. I mean, she left Jamestown without, you know, they were just separated. Nobody. Right. Said, you know, you really ought to get a divorce. Dee Dee was only in her early 40s or something. I said, you know, you might want to make another life or something. You ought to be. And Dee Dee said, maybe, you know, okay. But before she ever did anything about it, Ed Peterson died. And so that was sort of the end of that.
Do you have any recollection of Ed's mother, Sophia?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Grandma Peterson.
Yeah.
I mean, Lucy and I, you know, are two different versions of Grandma Peterson. It was true, Grandma Peterson. Lucille drove her crazy.
Mm-hmm.
She just did not like that girl. She was just too old country to understand this. Because, you know, Lucille was just, I mean, such hormones or whatever, but she always, something had to be going on. So craved an imagination. I mean, she talked about, she used to give actually publicity interviews. Publicists were always something that they could write about. And she would tell about her unhappy childhood. And she would go on about this step-grandmother that, you know, you envisioned the witch in the woods or something. The way Lucy was. And one day, we were all grown adults now, and one day I was out paying a visit to Dee Dee, who lived out in the valley. And it was on Sunday, and I drove out and to visit with Dee Dee and stay and have some lunch or something. And something came up. It was either maybe a recent magazine article or something. And Dee Dee said, she keeps giving these stories out about her unhappy childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, what was so unhappy about her childhood? I said, I don't know, Dee Dee. I said, she's just... And she said, well, the next time she brings that up, I'm going to ask her, what was so unhappy about your childhood? Well, it was as though you had written the script. Car drives up, and it's Lucy. She's come over, and she's married, and she lives out not too far from Dee Dee and with Desi and their ranch out in Chatsworth. And she comes in and says, oh, hi, I didn't know you were here too. Yeah, everything. Well, hang on a second. How's everybody doing? Just fine. You sit down. And I don't know where the conversation went. Why she would say she said, well, you know, I mean, that's the way it was. Unhappy childhood. It was like you had written this dialogue. And so I looked over at Dee Dee, like, go ahead. This is your opportunity. And Dee Dee said, and what was so unhappy about your childhood? And she said, all that time that I spent with Grandma Peterson. And Dee Dee said, and how long do you think you spent with Grandma Peterson? And Lucy said, I don't know, a year or two. Dee Dee said, you spent 3 weeks with Grandma Peterson. And she went on to tell her where she had gone. Dee Dee had some problems. They thought maybe consumption, and they called it in those days. And that she really should go to a warm climate. And at that time, Arizona was very much the place to go. So she had asked Grandma Peterson if she would take care of Lucy. And so she did. And, but Dee went there and said, oh, Lucy said, oh, Mom. Dee said, I left on the dee and I came back and the dee and you were there 3 weeks. But in her creative little mind, it was an eternity.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, she annoyed Grandma Peterson so much, it was like, sit still. You know, I mean, she couldn't sit still. She was just motion. And so she told tales about Grandma Peterson even to, and I suppose Grandma Peterson was. She really didn't like her, and she couldn't stand this child and drove her crazy. And so she probably was very strict with her, probably did tell her to go to your room or do what, this sort of thing. But when I stayed with Grandma Peterson adored me. And she always used to hide little Hershey almond bars. And she'd hide them in little drawers and things for me to go find. And, I was the pet. So that's the cruel and unhappy childhood that she had with Grandma Peterson.
What happened to Grandma Peterson? She stayed here?
In Jamestown, yes. Yeah. And I understand she died right, in that in that house. And I think Ed went back to live with her. I think that's what Dee Dee said, because when she came out, when she was in California, and I said, and what happened to Uncle Ed? And she said he was home living with his mother. And eventually they both died.
So your grandfather, Fred, is now moves out to California. I read someplace where he was active in the political party, but more or less the Communist Party. Did he register there?
I think that's what got him in. Well, I don't know whether it ever got him in trouble. Got everybody else in trouble. Yes, first of all, when he was here in Celeron, he was a Norman Thomas socialist. And of course, you have to appreciate in those days when there were no unions and there were no things to protect workers. A Norman Thomas socialism sounded very good. And then he just kept getting deeper into this. And then, particularly, of course, when he came to California, he had nothing. And then he was transplanted to California, which wasn't his cup of tea. I mean, he missed home. He missed everything about Celeron, Jamestown, his heritage, his family, his roots, everything. And he just was an old man who sat in the garage with a card table and a chair out there, a pipe, and he played solitaire thing. But there was nothing, and so politics became just a big thing in his life. And evidently, at some point, he registered and voted, but it was not against the law in the state of California. I don't know federally or whether it was a state-by-state thing, but a candidate for the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, they all were on the ballot. And Grandpa was very into it and subscribed to the Workers' Union or the Workers' something. Daily Worker was the communist newspaper, the Daily Worker. And so come whatever the next election was, I don't know if it's for governor or president, we all lived in the house on 1344 North Sargent Drive. And he was out recruiting voters. And of course he caught Fred and Lucille. They were voting age. I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, now this is something that should be very important in your life. I thought it down the thing. Okay, Grandpa. And they registered. Nobody bothered to vote.
Sure.
But placated Grandpa. Well, well, come the war and come the, was McCarthyism, do you know what year McCarthyism?
I want to say it was 1950.
That was the 50s.
Yeah, it was after the war.
It was after the war.
Yeah.
Okay. So the McCarthyism hit. And of course, McCarthy, to get headlines, Hollywood was just made for him.
Oh, yeah.
And so he started with all the writers and he started the thing. And then, of course, who knows how they dig up and can find out who you registered or what party you registered with, but you know, of course they can. And so, and now Lucy is doing I Love Lucy with Desi. I mean, Lucy and Desi are doing I Love Lucy. And they are just in the throes of their success and this adulation from the country and the viewers and everything else. And the headlines comes out that McCarthy accuses Lucy of I Love Lucy as being a communist. Well, they saw it in the papers. They saw Walter Winchell, I think, was the first, before he even hit the paper. I think Walter Winchell called them and said that he had just gotten this thing. Walter Winchell is coming out. Walter Winchell said McCarthy was coming out, naming himself. And of course, the next day it did. It hit the paper. And they had their press agents and everything, you know, out to the house and what strategy they would take and what.
Was she scared?
Sure. Of course she was. Because there was so much at stake. I mean, they were euphoric in their first throes of I Love Lucy and the success of it, and they couldn't believe it, and they're America's sweetheart couple, and you know, all of this. And suddenly this hits, and of course Desi, who had been through this in Cuba when the government was overthrown, and his father was mayor of the town he was in, and they were a privileged class, and they all. And the father took the son, and they fled the country because their lives were in danger. When you overthrow there, you know, run. And so politically, I mean, he stayed clear of everything because he had been through a revolution. And so, and then of course, the journalists, the paper, the press are surrounding the house, and they want the statements and Desi's statements. The only thing read about Lucy is her hair, you know, and tried to give them good quotes so they would have. And it gave them an enormous scare because the networks ran scared. Those were the things. It's not that people stood together and, you know. And I wonder what we would all be like, how strong any of us would be in the face of these things. That's an interesting concept. How courageous we might be. And so the networks were the chickens that you had to be afraid of because they would cancel you tomorrow if McCarthy said, you know, don't watch CBS or tainted some CEO or head of this. So everybody ran for cover, and that was, of course, their fear. But it was handled, and then I can't remember when the McCarthy hearings started with that wonderful old attorney, Joseph Welch, was that his name?
Wheeless.
Huh?
Wheeless.
Was it Wheelers?
I'm trying to think here. Ironically, I found this morning, a little script of the testimony of Lucille Ball of September 1953. Wheeler, apparently was the person who questioned Lucille. And it said, after Ms. Ball stated she was apparently voluntarily, and after she told she got her start as a film actress, $50 to $75 a week in Hollywood, the testimony in part was as follows. When did you first register to vote? I guess the first time I ever did was in 36. When they handed her a full static copy of the voter registration. That looks like my handwriting. You will note the party you tended to affiliate with at the time was the Communist Party in 36. Yes, I guess so. You did register to vote as a communist or intending to vote as a communist ticket, yes. And that began the discussion that she talks about grandfather Fred, just as you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But this was in 1953, she went before the...
But then after that, when McCarthy, the McCarthy hearings, when he had to... He was being sued by Joseph Welch, this
Welch, yeah, you're absolutely right.
old...
Navy officer.
And he was, and they went to court, and then the hearings were on every night.
That's right.
And little by little, of course, it destroyed McCarthy.
That's right. It wasn't Edward R. Murrow, he was very...
Ah, yes.
Mm.
Yes, Edward R. Murrow was the first to speak out against this kind of persecution by just naming an association and all that stuff. Yes, that's right, Edward R. Murrow. And then the trials were just, that was really democracy in action. That was seeing justice and seeing, this whole, because McCarthy was a big, he wasn't even serious. I would go along with somebody who believed in what he was doing. And he didn't even believe what he was doing. He was just doing because he was a seeker of, he wanted a high place, high position, and he was a senator, and he wanted to be in the forefront. He wanted to be so, but Welch certainly destroyed him right in front of the television audience. But many writers and things didn't fare so well. They did go, or was totally ostracized. Nobody could buy their works. Nobody would buy their works. And their lives were destroyed. Some of them never could come back.
Did Lucy feel at all that part of her career may have just been stalled for a little bit because of that accusation?
I don't think so, because I Love Lucy went right along. Mm-hmm. The networks did stick with her, and the general public did. And I think they couldn't accept it. They just couldn't accept it. Now, Fred suffered much more because in getting jobs and things, he had gotten several jobs in what you call war, the factories and things that were turned over just to turn out things for the war, different industries and things. And he was working in a plant, and then he would be discharged for no reason. They don't have to give you a reason. He would be discharged. And he didn't realize it until he just happened, like 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Something's following me. I mean, I'm being singled out for some reason. And I don't know whether he could ever prove it, but he found that he was being discharged with jobs after jobs. And then, of course, finally he was drafted in the service and everything. He was in the Army of Occupation in Japan. And so all that ended then when he came back. Of course, it was over. But it was destroyed a lot of people's lives. But they were lucky.
First day you see Desi Arnaz, what's your reaction?
He was warm and wonderful, and Lucy brought him to 1344 North Ogden Drive, our little house there. And she said, I want you all, to meet Desi. Desi, this is my grandfather and my mother and my sister and brother. And he was just very outgoing and funny. He said, oh, I'm so glad to know you, and oh, I'd love to see you, and oh, it's this beautiful California. He's all personality and all the thing. And he was warm and wonderful, and we embraced him from the beginning. And but she set her cap, and he may not have known it, but that was it, because he was this young. He was probably, I'm trying to think what the age difference was, whether it was 7 years or 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was only 25 or something. And he was being sought after by.
Come on, you can join us here, Cecil, if you like. She's good. She's very good.
Of course she is.
Lana Turner. I was thinking about Desi when he was in town in Hollywood making Too Many Girls at RKO Studio. And he was the young fellow about town, and all the gals were, very taken with him and pursuing him. And he was out in the Trocadero one night with Lana Turner, and one night I was trying to think of all the blonde, particularly sex pots that were in vogue at that time. So Lucy had a lot of competition. And, of course, that it was because she was under contract to RKO. And Too Many Girls had been a musical in New York, and RKO bought the rights to do a film. And she was cast in that film, and that's how they met. And but when the picture was over, and the dates and the dating and those was over, he went back to Broadway in another musical. And she found reason for the studio to send her east. She would do publicity stuff or whatever. And she came back married. So
I have someplace a note to Pauline Lopez in December, I think, of 1940, simply saying, guess what I did this weekend?
I got married.
You got married. It's just got a neat little, it was fairly short, but just describing how excited she was, and she got off, and so that would have been the time period.
Yeah. Is Pauline not alive?
She's not alive, no. Pauline passed away, and had a household sale. And it all
Was this 39, 40, what?
40, I believe.
40?
December.
It was before. When was the
War started in 41.
war started in 41? Well, they were married before the war, yeah. And so that was it. She was married in the East, married in Connecticut. Between shows and everything.
Was that a shock to Dee Dee?
Sure, it was a shock to all of us. I mean, we knew she'd be going easy. We knew she wanted to see him and all that. But how she got him to propose or suggest getting married, I don't know. But she did. And she was just, so in love that she couldn't see straight. That was her first time, She was 30. I can't remember the age difference, whether it was 5 years or 7. And I think it was 5.
Between who and who?
Lucy and Desi. I think she was 5 years older than he. But
let me ask a question that I want to know. Is there a question that hasn't been asked of you about the relationship between Lucy and Desi?
I don't think so. No. Well, I think everything has been asked and pretty well answered. There were no secrets, about the deterioration of the marriage towards the end. But the first 10 years, well, it was always, it was a difficult life, even after they were first married. things didn't work out for him. He was under contract with the studio. They weren't interested. And so he formed his band and he went on the road. And that's just not a healthy way. And of course, she was under contract with the studio, so she had to be here. And she was very jealous, I mean, even if nothing was going on, she could only imagine what might be,
Right.
So,
There was never nothing going on.
well, like I said, but even if he had been a faithful man, she would not believe it because she was very jealous. But, that was his upbringing. It had nothing to do with loving her or not loving her or anything else. It was his upbringing. And Dee Dee told me one day when he had been estranged from the father, because father never sent for mother when they left Cuba.
Right.
And father became involved with a woman in Miami and married her eventually, and adopted her daughter. So Desi, of course, sent for mother and took care of her all his life. But Dee Dee, when eventually, I think when the first child was born, Desi decided that it was time to amend the relationship between father and son. And he did. And they invited him to the ranch and to see his grandchild.
Child, yeah.
And so he came. And Dee Dee was always there too, of course, at the ranch, taking care of things. And Dee Dee told me, she said, "Can you imagine?" She used a little language that, imagine that. She said, he told Desi. I mean, he admitted to Dee Dee that he told Desi, "You're going to be involved with a woman, make sure she's a married woman. She won't give you any trouble."
That was fatherly advice.
Fatherly advice. And she said, so the Cubans, and so many Latin, not anymore, I don't think, but it used to be. The wife, the family, the things, and the Mr. Son's side was quite acceptable. And so father gave his approval. As long as she's a married woman, you won't cause you any trouble.
What did Dee Dee say about all this?
Oh, of course, that she was furious, the very idea of telling something. But she liked Desi. You couldn't help but like Desi. He loved all the things that were family and were, but the temperaments between the two. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And then their professions and the stress and the separations and all of that. But
did I get a sense that Lucille, off the air, was a really sober woman in the sense of serious?
very much so. Yeah. And very organized and very, the household ran with it. And she was very strict about the way things ran around the house and the demands that she made of their servants and the ladies and things. And then there was the other side of her. Then she would go overboard with gifts and involvement if they were ill or if they had a sad tale to tell about a daughter who was missing. There was that caring side too, that you did help people in trouble. But at the same time, she was very strict about the way the house should be run, the way their lives should be run. And of course, Desi was life-loving. He was much deeper, thoughtful, more of a reader, more interests than she had.
Mhm.
And her whole focus in life was her career and her talent. And so it was a rough match.
Did she think she was funny?
Oh, she thinks Lucy is funny. Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's strictly the character.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And the way it worked out, and scrutinizing every mannerism and everything about. Oh, yeah. But she realized how humorous it was.
Did she watch it at home? I'm envisioning her in her later years turning on TV. Did she watch I Love Lucy?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. I don't know whether she would read, reruns, but she certainly did.
She had all the shows on tape.
Yes, we had a collection, of course, of all the shows, and but she would scrutinize them. And technically, everything she did was correct.
Mm-hmm.
She was a technician, and she knew every movement and how every muscle would react and how. Yeah, very. It didn't come from just being
Great.
funny.
When she left I Love Lucy, well, let's go back and let's talk about Cleo. You're in Hollywood, and living with Lucy. Give me your timeline. Give me what happened to you.
As a kid, you mean?
As a kid, well, we got to sell around. We're now in California.
We're into Hollywood now. I've come.
That's what I mean, as a young girl coming
Yeah,
down with.
I was 16 and arrived in Hollywood. And in the house was all, the whole family now that I had left, they were all back.
No, in Ogden, right?
Yeah, and they're all back together. And after being away 5 years, and I told you about the cultural, well, coming back was a culture shock.
Yeah.
Now suddenly of course, California was a culture shock. I had never seen anything like it. She met me at the bus station in Los Angeles in full makeup, full costume. She was doing a film, an RKO, and she got a few hours off to come meet her cousin who's coming in a Greyhound bus station in LA. And she drove down in this convertible Studebaker Phaeton. It was beige colored, and that Phaeton was a 4-door convertible. And she drives up and picked me up at the station. And of course, and I hadn't seen her as a movie star. And she knew that would blow me over. I knew she was doing it just what a 16-year-old would react. And I just couldn't take her all in and take everything in. And then she said, "Now I'm going to take you to the studio for lunch, because I've got to get back to work." She takes me to the studio for lunch, the commissary, and we walk into the commissary, get a table, and it's noontime, and everybody who's anybody is there. And this was 1935. And there's Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire and Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant,
Wow.
who was my passion. Cary Grant. And all these big stars that were at RKO at that time. And of course, it was just mind-boggling. I mean, I had never, and she was just enjoying every minute of it. And then finally, I went down on the set with her until the day was through and watched all the filming and shooting. And it was with Lily Pons and Henry Fonda, I think. I can't remember. And we went home the evening, and of course, then the house was a delight. I mean, coming from Buffalo, New York, all the woodwork was dark and everything was, and this house was painted white, and it had pretty powder blue wallpaper, and it had an avocado tree. I'd never seen an avocado in my life in her yard. And there was an orange tree. I'd never seen an orange on a tree. And it was just mind-boggling. And Lucy, of course, couldn't imagine anybody not wanting to be in movies. So she set about in the next month or so to get me an SAG card and got me jobs as extras in movies. And I had never had any desire to be in a movie. But she was doing a movie. She was about to do a movie called Having a Wonderful Time up at Big Bear. And they needed a lot of young extras to be out paddling canoes in the lake and throwing balls over the volleyball net or something, to make it look. It was to be a camp. It was Camp Tammerman it was supposed to be.
Catskills.
Yeah, back in the Catskills, filming it in California up at Big Bear. And so that was my first experience. Well, that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Because we were a lot of young people, and I met a lot of others that were regular extras and things, and they knew all the ropes, and they helped me a lot. And we were up at Big Bear, and we were having a ball. So that was fun. But I didn't want ever. Once in a while, they will say to the extras something. I need somebody to come to the door and they have a line. Who likes to do it or who wants to do it? Yeah, I never wanted to face the camera or say anything. And so then you begin to meet people and you make friends with assistant directors, and it's the assistant directors who really call all the extras.
Mm-hmm.
And I began working in movies for the next 2 or 3 years. But I was certainly had no ambition. And so then that's the way life in Hollywood went. I mean, Lucy was in and out of the house. She was under contract in RKO. She did lots of magazine shoots and things like that. She'd take me with her all the time. So, but
then what happened to you?
Well, then I got married.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was 19. So I must have worked and, in jobs and things for about 3 years. And Lucy was doing a radio show. And she was appearing, doing lots of radio. Her agent, all of a sudden, I don't know why, but he got her a lot of radio jobs. And on one of the shows that she went, I met someone that was RDR back. And I got married when I was 19. Moved out of the house. And of course had she gotten, now the time frame, I'm trying to think whether she was married yet. When did she get married? What year?
I want to think 40 is what comes to mind. 1940?
1940?
Mm-hmm. But I'm no Rick Wyman, so I don't have this memorized.
Yeah.
When you went to New York, were you married? No.
No, that was all before.
Along those same lines, at one point, I'm changing gears for a quick second. One point, Lucy and Desi, having been married, had one, maybe two miscarriages.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was Desi's mother who suggested that because they didn't have
because they hadn't been married in the church.
How did that play out?
Played out just like that.
Did it really?
Got married in the church, and she was pregnant within a few 6 months or something. Make you a believer. Certainly confirm mother's beliefs.
Yeah.
And I think probably Desi's too. And that's really did It didn't happen.
Did that cement their relationship at the time? I mean, did you get a sense that that was?
They always were very sentimental about things that they did do together, and things like that were very meaningful because it was very meaningful to him.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get away from it. He wasn't really a constant churchgoer or anything like that, but it's there. And when he went in that church and took those vows, and of course she had been taking whatever lessons or you take to become Catholic, and she didn't actually convert to become a Catholic, but she promised. She did take whatever you'd have to do to prepare to marry someone who's in the Catholic Church, and you do take the vows that the children will be raised Catholic, and she did do that. And the funny part is, she didn't convert, but Dee Dee converted.
Oh, no kidding.
Because I don't know whether they really needed someone who would be like the guardian of the children's education in religion. And in order to do that, you had to be a confirmed Catholic to be in the position to guide the children through their religious education. So Dee Dee said, okay, for my grandchildren, I'll do it.
And you're up to 1950 now. You're about 10 years later.
Because they married, in the church about 10 years after that. But then Dee Dee took the vows and did confirm and would be then appointed in charge of their religious education.
I took you on a sidetrack there. You got to age 19, 20. You're married. Are you out of the business right now?
Mm-hmm.
Have any children?
No.
No children?
No.
Their marriage only lasted about a year, didn't it?
A couple of years, I think. I was 21. Yeah, about 2 years. 19 to 21.
And you're still in California?
Oh, yeah. I never left California.
Okay.
She was in New York there when war broke out.
Yes, I was. I was in New York City.
Yeah.
Just on a trip. I was sharing an apartment with a girlfriend, and she was a dancer and an actress, and she had gotten a part in Danny Kaye's first musical on Broadway.
Sure.
And my mother had left a small insurance policy that when I was 21 years of age, would come to me. And so just happened, the timing. Peggy was going to go to New York to be in the show, and I got the money from the insurance. And so what better way to go than what better way to spend it? I said, I'd never been to New York.
Yeah.
I'll go with you. And it was very exciting because she was involved in a big musical that was going to open with this wonderful newcomer, Danny Kaye.
Best foot forward.
Best foot forward. And and there were a lot of parties and cocktail parties and things given for all, the cast and all that. So I got in all of that. I got to go and do, and so it was an exciting time, and Cecil's right. Pearl Harbor happened while we were in New York, and everybody was scrambling. I wanted to go home, and people are saying, why would you want to go to California? The Japanese are coming. And I said, because my family's there, and I want to be with my family. I mean, it was real. We were going to be invaded, and we were going to be singing, and I wanted to go home. And you could get a flight to California easily because nobody else wanted to go. And when I went down there, wherever I went to see if I could get home as quickly as tomorrow or something, Yeah, you bet. And so I flew back to California. And then, of course, from there on in, the war took up a lot of years and a lot of involvements and things.
Mm-hmm.
And goodness knows they didn't invade us, but they certainly did come close, didn't they?
And you married Ken during the war?
Yes, and I married just before the war, before he was shipped overseas. So then I remarried, and
You worked in canteens, and you worked in...
while he was gone for 4 years, and married somebody that, 2 months later he was gone for 4 years.
Yeah.
But it was long marriage, 18 years.
Yeah.
I was married, yeah. And but during that period, also, what happened? They bought the studio, and I Love Lucy, and all that stuff happened then, or did it happen before? My dates are all.
Who bought Lucy?
I don't know. Desi bought RKO
Oh, no, that was way after the war.
way after the war.
Yeah, that was
The
in the
next-
late 50s.
So from there on in, I don't.
What's your highlight? You close your eyes and say, oh, all the things I've been exposed to, from producing to, you sit back and say, the event that jumps out at me first and foremost is what?
Probably marrying Cecil Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I had become I was working at Look Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it started telling you. I was working at Look Magazine, and Wanda, who was Lucy's secretary, was
Wanda
working
Clark.
at Look. And of course, I was in the promotion department, so the first thing we did every morning was read all the papers, particularly the columnists and the entertainment columns, and you read the trades, and you read all that. So I had begun reading. I always read Cecil Smith's column and all the trades and things. And of course, I saw a lot of Lucy through this period. And everyone knows, on a trip to with her, she was in between shows. They'd always have a hiatus, a couple of weeks or something. And she didn't care about relaxing. Just, let's go to Vegas. And so I would always accompany her and go. I was not a gambler, and I had no interest in it, but I would go with her. And it was on one of those trips that Cecil was covering a story on a film. Were you entertainment editor, I think,
Yeah.
at that time? And so he'd come to do a story, Ocean's 11,
Mm-hmm.
with Frank Sinatra and I guess all the Rat Pack,
Mm-hmm.
Sinatra and Martin and all. And I was sitting with Lucy and a whole table of people. Marlena Dietrich was there, and several, George Slaughter and his wife. And Lucy spotted Cecil, and he waved, and she said, "Come on over. Say hello." He came over to say hello. He knew everyone at the table. They were all people in the business. And she said, "But have you met my sister?" And he said, "Nope." So she said, "Cleo? Cecil Smith, Cleo." I had no idea what he looked like, so I didn't know him. I said, "Cecil Smith? Oh, no. I'm a fan. I read your column every day." And of course, he says, "Really? Tell me more." And he sat down and, and I told him more. And a year later, we were married. And that was 40 years ago.
And you haven't looked back.
No, I haven't looked back.
That's terrific.
And had my first job. Had a son. We were both in our 40s, and I had my first child by birth. I had adopted son.
Mm-hmm.
who was then 17. But Cecil and I were very surprised. We had expected our life to just be, oh, okay, we were at that age that we were free. We could do anything we wanted to do, be anywhere. And along came Marcus. And he's been a joy. Yes? Except through the teenage.
Oh,
Yeah, well, we can all raise our hands to those kids who are going through it. I have two of them currently, so.
Yeah, oh, do you right now? What age?
I have them 16, 18, and 20.
Oh, well, 20 should be pretty much
25,
over that.
25. So that gives me hope eternal that
Yeah,
everything will work out fine.
Absolutely. What was it? Cecil once wrote, I think, in a column, and it shows you the difference between the intellect and the rural raising that I had. He wrote in his column that all teenagers should be raised in a barrel and fed through the bunghole until they were 20 years old. And I said, how can you print that? He said, what do you mean? I said, fed through the bunghole. And he said, oh, bunghole? Well, not according to Grandpa Hunt.
That's right.
The bunghole.
Yeah, that would have been read differently in Selma, New York.
Well, that's the way I read it, like a Selma night. How can you say it?
No, that's really cute. Yeah, that's cute. Sure you see that chord there, too.
yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
That's not alive, Pops.
No, I know, but I thought it was
Let's end with this. I've taken 2 hours of your time. But tell me about the Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton episode.
Well, as you know, they were the heights of their careers at that time, their popularity, I should say. They were in every column, every magazine, everything in the world. They had set the world on fire with their torrid romance and Cleopatra, and then their marriage, and then he buys her, I've forgotten now the size of the diamond that he bought her, but it was just a fabulous piece. And so the Burtons were in Beverly Hills, California, being entertained at a cocktail party because he had been nominated that year for the Oscars, and that's why they were there. And Lucille and Gary Morton were at the same cocktail party. And across the room, Burton made eye contact with Lucy, and he said, in mime, because people are all around chattering and everything, he said, and she is saying, what? And he's saying, I work for you. And she always, she never believed she was a big star with all this room full. And she's looking around to see if he's talking to somebody else. And she said, with me? And because television, here's a big movie star and he wants to do a television. She said, yes. So she said, oh, Gary, they went over and they talked. They said, really? You really want? I mean, you have the time? He said, yes. He said, I want to. I have long one. So she said, okay, where do we go from here? And he said, I'll give Gary my agent's name, and he can contact him tomorrow and make the deal. We're here, and I want to do it. So that was how it happened. The next day, she came into the studio, called me to her office immediately because I was producing that series. And she said, let me tell you what happened last night. So she goes through all the endings, and she said, they want to do an episode. So get a script, get on it, because it's got to be almost immediate because will be leaving after the Oscars. I said, okay. Gave it some thought as to what writers that were under contract to us would we assign this to. And of course, my mind went back to Bob, Carol, and Madeline. And I said to Lucy, what about Bob and Madeline? And she said, she hadn't seen them in several years. She said, I don't know. Say to be interested or want to work with me. I said, well, may I ask them? Of course, she said, sure. She was being very intimate. So I did. Next day, I went over and talked to Bob and Madeline, presented it to them. And of course, they were wild about the idea of working with Bert and Taylor. And they did. And the script was wonderful. It was one of our I Love Lucy scripts. And it worked beautifully. Burton was wonderful to work with. Elizabeth is always, ailing.
Mm-hmm.
Always sort of not well. Mm-hmm. So we really didn't see her until the final scene that she was in. And then she's ready, she's a professional, and she's prepared, and she comes out. But you didn't have any interplay or relationship with her. But he was wonderful. He was wonderful. And his famous remark, Cecil, of course, he was always chiding Cecil, who was to have a little bit of this one. And he said, well, oh boy, I've never had to sleep with a producer to get a job in my life.
And the crowd that night was not your normal off-the-street crowd, was it?
No, it was filled with everybody in the entertainment business that heard about it, knew about it, and all of them. I mean, that's how big Burton and Taylor were, that they drew people in the industry. And it was enormously successful, and there was so much applause and so much laughter that it stretched way beyond the 26 minutes. Isn't it 26 minutes that we usually allow for commercial time?
Right.
And it went into at least 35, 40 minutes of just straight show time. And we had tried to appeal to CBS. Thought they'd be very excited about it. Mm-hmm. These two big stars, movie stars, to give us an hour place schedule it. But they said the scheduling on both sides of us was tight, and there was no other place they could place it on the network, and so no.
Was that your highlight from a producing viewpoint?
Oh, sure, because it was the most exciting thing. They were the biggest thing in it, so it was, everybody was in awe of having Burton and Taylor.
The ratings must have gone skyrocketing that night.
They were very good indeed.
Rick said the other day it was the second highest rated Lucy show in history. The first one was The Birth of Desi, and this was the second highest. I don't understand why they've never been released again. Or reruns or
the whole Here's Lucy thing. I don't know. I don't keep track anymore.
Perfect thing of some sort.
So
you've been terrific.
Well, thank you.
Terrific. And I feel so bad taking up 2 hours and 4 hours of your time. I've been here all afternoon between eating and listening and gasping and grabbing all kinds of information from you.
That's what we thought it would be all about, right?